Hi guys, this is Jen, and in today's video I wanted to talk about a topic that I've been getting pretty frustrated with in the media. Pretty much everywhere I look, people are representing green beauty in a certain way. So in this video I wanted to address this topic. What do we mean when we say green, and also is natural green? So the first point, what do we mean when we say green? And I think people think a lot of different things, but probably they're thinking about the environmental impact. I personally think we should be more focused on the sustainability impact, and there are so many different definitions out there for sustainability. Some are very similar, some are quite different. I see that as a challenge. We should probably be a bit more unified. But ultimately, we want to meet the needs of today without compromising the future needs of the next generation. And it also addresses the social, environmental, and economic side of things. I've linked some definitions below. The Brundtland Commission, the natural step theory for sustainability I really like, or the Sustainable Development Goals. In a video I did a while ago, a Green Beauty in Toronto, Dana Stein also did a really great job defining sustainability. So if you want a lot more detail, then head on over to that video. What do we mean when we say natural? Because if we're asking, is natural better? Well, it helps to know what natural is. So usually when we are saying something is natural, it comes from steam distillation or cold pressing or physical extraction, things like essential oils, waxes, plant-based oils. As we start to change them chemically, then you get into the naturally derived territory. And when you really have to process it, and when it comes from things like sand and petroleum, we tend to think of it as a synthetic ingredient. If you'd like more detail on the way that the industry views natural, you can refer to the ISO standard 16128, and they've laid it out pretty well. But I think it's worth noting that there's not some line in the sand to say that this ingredient is natural and this ingredient isn't. Being natural tells us nothing about its safety, about its usefulness and formulation, and it certainly doesn't tell us anything about its sustainability. So a few examples here. You can think of nature identical ingredients, and so these are ingredients that are synthetic by our definition, but they are made to be chemically the same as what you'd find in nature. So a good example is iron oxides. In a lot of makeup, unbeknownst to a lot of people, there's not really a such thing as, at least in the mainstream, all natural makeup, because a lot of times they use iron oxides. Before, we were sourcing it from nature and people were getting very sick because the iron oxides were contaminated. Regulations came in place to ensure that iron oxides were going to be made in a lab, and now we have much safer cosmetic products. Another example could be from essential oils. So it takes hundreds to thousands of pounds of plant material to extract a single pound of essential oil. So 50 to 60 pounds of eucalyptus, 200 to 250 pounds of lavender, and upwards to 10,000 pounds of rose petals for a single pound of essential oil. With the rise in aromatherapy, if the requirements for plant material is so high, can that be sustainable? If the plant material is coming from plants that are endangered or have slow regrowth, an example could be sandalwood. It takes about 10 years to come to a point of maturity for extraction, and then extraction kills the plant. Or if the plant is in a marginal habitat, such as with frankincense, and there are a number of other examples, we tend to have an appetite for tropical ingredients, but tropical usually means that they are in those marginal habitats. A common misconception is that if you're using renewables, then that's going to be the easy green choice. And if you're using non-renewables, then that's obviously a bad choice. And to highlight this, over the last few years, there have been several studies that have looked at the impacts of agriculture on our environment, on climate change, for example, and looking at how using less land for agriculture is actually better. And I think it highlights some of the challenges. So in May 2019, a UN report from IPBES, Nature's Dangerous Decline, Unprecedented, Species Extinction Rates Accelerating. This was the greatest attempt yet to assess the state of life on Earth, showing how tens of thousands of species are at high risk of extinction and how we're using nature around the world at a rate that far exceeds its ability to renew itself. Nature's ability to contribute food and fresh water to a growing population is being compromised in every region on Earth. When talking about the environmental burdens these days, the emphasis in policy tends to be on climate change, but biodiversity is arguably just as important for our future and also intertwined. Land degradation, biodiversity loss, and climate change are three facets of the same central challenge. From that report, the largest driver was land and sea use, i.e. agriculture. Today, more than a third of the world's surface and nearly 75% of freshwater resources are devoted to crop and livestock production. Since the 1970s, agricultural crop production has increased by about 300%, with 60 billion tons of renewable and non-renewable resources extracted annually. And realistically, this is just going to continue unless we really change the way that we value our resources. Right now, there's a lot of value to using them because they increase our GDP. So there also has to be, alongside trying to minimize the land that we use, a bit of a systems change. Two studies published in Nature in 2018, they both highlighted the fact that using less land is very important to reducing our impact, as well as being more intensive with our farming, because that means we're more efficient, and then also using less land. And so moving forward, using less land is super important if we actually want to, with the case of agriculture, have sustainable food systems, but also for us, if we're making natural ingredients, have sustainable natural ingredients for whatever industry. So contrasting that to synthetics, it's important to be aware that there's no petroleum sourcing with the intent of making cosmetic ingredients. The petrochemicals that are used are all waste products from the petroleum sector. So with or without us using them, they would be there regardless. And so right now we're just using them, purifying them. They're demonstrably safe, but we're using a waste product. Don't be disillusioned into thinking that natural ingredients don't require petrochemicals. How much petroleum was used for the tractors, for the trucks that transport the materials, for the extractors, the energy required. So there's still petroleum there, but in that case, it's not a waste product. Of course, petrochemicals need to be refined, so that also has petroleum in the process. Ultimately, if we're sourcing a material to replace a product that was derived from waste and already in our system, it's hard to see how, in some cases at least, that would be more efficient. An important question I think to ask about natural ingredients in cosmetics is, are we using prime agricultural land to produce them, or are they coming from waste? For example, in this space that would otherwise be dedicated to food, is that now replaced with a cosmetic ingredient? And that seems kind of selfish. Or is it being used from crops that we're already using anyways for food, such as corn, soy, rapeseed, wheat, things like that? Is it waste from those crops? Or from other industries? For example, lumber, we've got a lot of it in Canada. Why not make ingredients from it? I think that is important to the question when deciding. Just thinking about it, we're trying to minimize the land that we're using for agriculture. So using land just for the cosmetics industry, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Organic compounds this issue even more, where we need more land because the process is less efficient. More and more studies are coming out that organic may not be the sustainable choice for many reasons. Despite that, there's a market push to tell us that organic is sustainable. And this isn't just in food, it's happening also in cosmetics. And if you think about it critically, about the fact that we need to use less land, the limitations of organic agriculture, especially pertaining to their efficiency, if you accept the fact that we need to use less land for our agriculture, or as little land as we can. With these studies in mind, is that really the sustainable choice? Important to this conversation is genetic engineering. There are a lot of different feelings about this in the industry. Thinking about how can it help us do better. This is a ginormous conversation and we don't have enough time to talk about it. But if you'd like more detail, coming up on Tuesday, I'm going to be releasing on my podcast a conversation with Dr. Kevin Folta, and we went through the topic of GMOs in quite a lot of detail, including how can they help us do better, and like what should we be considering when we're talking about sustainable agriculture. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding genetic engineering and what sustainable agriculture looks like. It's not always correct. Right now, I find that our industry is so focused on organic, on natural, and non-GMO. But with respect to sustainable agriculture, looking at it a bit more scientifically, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to move forward now in a sustainable direction. Some of the bigger perpetuators of these market forces in the cosmetic industry are our eco certifications, because everyone wants that stamp of approval from the EWG or EcoCert. Looking into the requirements for these certifications, if you look at EcoCert Cosmos, there are a lot of things that I do like about this certification. I like that they want to see, for example, carbon footprint reductions. They want to see lower energy use. I like that. But they also emphasize the fact that you need a certain percentage of natural ingredients, and on top of that, you need a certain percentage of those natural ingredients to be organic certified. From their vantage, the organic ingredients will be more sustainable, and when consumers see EcoCert or Cosmos on a label, they make an assumption that they are more sustainable. They will also just not allow genetically engineered ingredients. You can produce ingredients so much more efficiently if you had, for example, biocatalysts sometimes, with a case of a company that I'm a fan of, Genomatica, where they're using a genetically engineered biocatalyst. None of it is in the end product to produce butylene glycol. With the input of a biocatalyst, they were able to reduce the carbon footprint to produce butylene glycol by around 50%. Clearly, that's a good thing, but unfortunately, because they can't get the stamp of approval by EcoCert, some companies might just prefer to make the easy option, especially because it's cheaper, and use butylene glycol that has a higher carbon footprint. Also, consumers, when they see this, EcoCert means more sustainable. My question is, do they? And then with respect to EWG, I mean, they clearly just have a preference for natural ingredients and a preference against synthetic ingredients. They have a no-no list, but all of them are quote-unquote synthetics. There are a number of natural ingredients that are even toxicants to us, or even carcinogens. For example, IFRA, with respect to isoeugenol, requires essential oils with it because some of them naturally contain this chemical, such as rose essential oil. They require lower percentages to ensure that it's going to be safe. But there is a demonstrated link to carcinogenicity with this chemical. But isoeugenol is not on their list of no-no ingredients, and I'd say it's because it's naturally derived. So since the eco certifications are so influential in our industry, I personally think that there needs to be some real change if we actually want to strive to be actually more sustainable. So in this video, I said a lot. Obviously, form your own opinions, but in my own opinion, when I think about green in cosmetics, when it comes to natural, it's just a case-by-case basis. You can't make blanket statements and say natural will be green, because there are so many examples that natural probably isn't a great option. Rose essential oil, probably not. especially if you can make it in a bioreactor. New technologies are coming out to make this a reality. Probably that would be a more sustainable option. Are the ingredients coming from endangered crops or marginal habitats where it might be disruptive to ecosystems? That should probably be a consideration. Something that I have been thinking more and more about is the ingredient coming from current agriculture? Is it waste? Or are we dedicating land to produce that material with the sole purpose of being used in cosmetics? I think there's a difference. I also think that there's a real opportunity on the flip side for biotechnology, especially for some of these more difficult ingredients, to do things better. By using, for example, sugar waste from current agriculture, use a bioreactor in a much less space than planting stuff, and then you can produce more than the world could have ever produced naturally. So does natural equal green? I would say no, but it can. Ultimately, we should be as critical of the natural ingredients as we are of the synthetic ingredients. I think we should have certain metrics to help us look at the materials more critically, look at the carbon footprint, the supply chain. Is it coming from waste? What are the actual environmental impacts? And not just making an assumption that because it's organic, because it's natural, that that's the better option. What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. It's obviously a huge topic, and I've dedicated a lot of videos and podcasts to it. I don't know if I'm right, and I'm sure I missed something. So let me know what you think. If you like this video, be sure to like, and if you like this channel, be sure to subscribe, and let's continue this conversation. Thanks for tuning in.